our final briefing for the semester. We'll be focusing on a New York State bill prohibiting importation of wildlife and fish and live animal market restrictions. And if we're ready to go, let's go.
How do we prevent the next pandemic? Good morning. My name is Giacomo. And today we're going to try to answer this crucial global question with a local solution. In fact, in the next 10 minutes, you'll learn how an assembly bill aims to build up the preparedness of the entire New York State to future health hazards. But before getting started, I would like to thank Leslie and Aaron for co-creating this presentation, Professor Roy for her guidance, and the entire Zoonosis Watch team for their amazing work over the past 5 months. So let's go back to the question central to answering our question. Assembly Bill A05947, a legislative action introduced in February of this year by Assemblymember Joanne Simon. This bill is rooted in prevention, and it aims to set up safeguards against a crucial risk to public health, zoonosis. Zoonosis refers to infectious diseases that are spread from animals to humans. They can originate from fungi, bacteria, or viruses. And in the case of viruses, they spread from a reservoir, such as a bat or a rat. They go through genetic changes and become infectious not only to humans, but among humans. Now, the emergence of zoonotic pandemics, such as COVID-19, really exemplifies the urgency of addressing this crucial risk to public health. Just in New York State, 7.5 million people suffered from COVID-19. And to cure just 30 of those patients, the average cost during the pandemic was $380,000. With that same budget, this bill aims to set up a structured prevention system that significantly reduces the risk of zoonotic pandemics for all 19 million New York State residents. So today you'll learn more about the risk of zoonosis in New York State and how this bill aims to address this issue. You'll also learn how an innovative organizational design aims to support the achievement of this program and what kind of organizational, logistical, and financial arrangements are needed to help this program come to life in the first year of operations. Let's go back to the central issue, New York State. New York State is a hotspot for zoonotic risk. It includes major migratory bird flyways. It is a major port of entry for wildlife imports for all the United States, and it has 82 live animal markets, most of which, as you can see on this map, located in New York City, in dense urban neighborhoods. Within these markets, animals, vendors, and customers coexist in tight, poorly ventilated spaces, increasing the chances that some of those bacteria and viruses borne by animals spill onto humans. And to understand how real a threat this is, we need to look no further back than February of this year, where an outbreak of avian flu, which might as well be the next zoonotic pandemic, led to live animal markets across all the state to be shuttered for public health and safety concerns for several months. Now, the problem is not the presence of these markets. It's not the volume of wildlife imports. It's the limited oversight. Without a coordinated approach to regulations on which animals can enter into the state, which animals can be sold in these markets, what are the hygiene standards and how to enforce these standards, the risk of zoonotic spillover remains significantly high. Now, to address this issue, this bill amends 2 existing legislative frameworks. First, it amends the Environmental Conservation Law to significantly reduce the risk of bringing in new diseases through wildlife imports. It sets up a ban for wildlife species to be imported into the state if deemed at high risk of carrying zoonotic diseases. It also establishes some safeguards to remove wildlife import licenses that have already been issued if they see them as a threat to public health. It also amends the Agriculture and Markets Law to increase the oversight over these markets. In particular, it sets up a list of wildlife species that cannot be sold into these markets. It sets new standards for hygiene, separation of species, but also the humane handling of these animals in the transport and sale to reduce the risk of spillover. And last but not least, it also provides regulators with enforcement tools, warnings, monetary fines, and even misdemeanor charges. To support this ambitious goal of prevention, Our proposed implementation design focuses on public health first and foremost, with a speedy implementation timeline right after the adoption of the bill, strict enforcement mechanisms with harsh penalties for non-compliance, the engagement of experts across all steps of the implementation process, and an emphasis on increasing animal welfare across the transfer and sale of these specimens. Now, to balance public health with economic interest, a phased approach to the implementation of these outright bans on wildlife sale and imports will enable live animal market owners and operators to transition and pivot to these new guidelines. At the same time, consultations with communities will internalize some of the social factors that are important to New York State residents, such as the sale of culturally significant foods. Now, to support the adoption of these two major goals of the bill, we propose the creation of two coordination hubs that don't compete with existing hierarchies, but rather cluster functional and competent units across 3 New York State departments, one focusing on wildlife import and one on wildlife sale. Now, to make sure that the best available science is reviewed and serves the implementation of this bill, we also propose the creation of an advisory board, an advisory committee clustering public and private experts that can advise these two hubs. Chairing the Wildlife Import Hub would be the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, tasked not only with creating and publishing a list of wildlife species that cannot enter the state via imports within the first 2 months, but also screening applications for new import licenses and exemptions from this ban. Similarly, the Department of Agriculture and Market would be competent for drafting a list of wildlife species that cannot be sold once within the state, and providing guidelines to live animal markets so that operators then have 5 weeks between week 10 and 15 after the adoption of the bill to transition to these new guidelines and not face penalties for non-compliance. After week 15, the Department of Agriculture and Market would be competent also for carrying out the inspections, as they have an extensive staff of animal health inspectors and veterinary diagnostic specialists. Last, under the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Advisory Committee would advise the two hubs, clustering 5 external research institutions that already collaborate with these departments, and importantly, including the Department of Health, which is fundamental through its community clinics to detect emerging cases of zoonotic risk. Now, to track and manage this extensive organizational design, each agency leading the hubs will be responsible for clustering metrics on each program area on a biweekly basis and reported back to the advisory committee through quarterly reports to ensure not only coordination among these 3 departments and 5 external research institutions, but also that the best available science is integrated within these protocols. The first 10 weeks after the adoption of the bill will be fundamental to ensure the effective implementation of this program, with, by the end of week 10, both lists for bans published and operational to enable animal health inspectors to be trained by week 15 and then carrying out inspections on a quarterly basis until the end of the first year of operations. You may be wondering, how much will all of this cost? The operating assumption is that the staffing capacity of these 3 departments is already sufficient to carry out these activities. Nonetheless, with a budget of $380,000, we allocate the majority of funds to the 2 hubs leading agencies, although a specific item is also dedicated to the Department of Health to make sure that they can boost their surveillance capability of emerging zoonotic risks. The vast majority of the funds would be allocated to strengthening already existing functions within these departments, with research associates, advisory committee liaisons, and animal health inspectors getting more hours to fulfill this mandate, but also the purchase of new state-of-the-art equipment for veterinary diagnostic and testing. Within the first year of operation, you can see also that we project over $7,000 in collections of fines from non-compliant live animal markets. To sum up, zoonotic risk remains a systemic risk for both the world and New York State. This bill aims to significantly reduce it by first regulating the import of wildlife species considered to be at high risk, but also ensuring that the sale within live animal markets is safe and hygienic. Our implementation design puts health front and center to minimize the risk to public safety with strict enforcement mechanisms and a speedy implementation timeline. 2 coordination hubs are tasked with making sure that 3 departments and 5 organizations work together to better monitor risk, design guidelines, and enforce these bans. With less than $400,000, this bill can set up a structured prevention system to make sure that New York State is not only resilient to future outbreaks, but more reactive to current ones. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, fantastic presentation, the visual and the verbal presentation. I was very engaged. One question that popped into my mind while you're presenting, you mentioned that not only will certain species be restricted from sale in live animal markets, but also import into the state. You mentioned that there will be certain exceptions granted. Have you thought about important like research institutions like Cornell or even something like the Bronx Zoo, which is, you know, there's a lot of turnover, but it is either likely not to cause zoonotic spread or even can be used to research how to stop it. Are those would those have blanket exemptions, or is it more case by case?
That's a fantastic observation and a great question. Thankfully, this is not an area for discretion in the bill. The bill outright bans the import of bats, rats, and primates, but it also grants exemptions on a case-by-case basis if pro bono research institutions can provide sufficient documentary evidence that they can handle these animals with proper biosafety protocols. So this would be discretionary for the DEC for research institutions and zoos.
Thank you for the really good presentation. I agree with Brendan, the visuals were fantastic. You mentioned in the reporting and measurements of success that you're gonna require a bi-weekly reporting, and that seems really, really frequent and requires a lot of manpower. So I'm wondering if there's any precedents that you base this on.
That has been a crux of an issue for us. Thankfully, there is already existing mechanism and structure of reporting within these agencies because, again, this is an amendment to existing legislation. So they already have to do inspections, they already have to do reporting, and they already have to monitor wildlife imports into the state. Now, the additional point would be that these systems talk to each other. And that's why the additional staffing would be to have 2 people within these departments to act as liaisons between the hubs, so the research centers, and the 2 implementing agencies. There is also a digital surveillance system that is automated. So all that data would flow automatically from clinics all the way up to these 2 hubs.
Thank you very much. My question is regarding the $7,200 fine revenue. Like, is that based off of previous offenders' database that you guys find, or how do you project you're going to get $7,200 in revenue?
That is a great question. So the maximum fine in the bill is $1,000, and there are 82 live animal markets. Currently, there is a 10% negative outcome for inspections within live animal markets. We anticipate that this will double in the first year of operations as market operators struggle to adjust to this new, more stringent data. So the $7,800 would be the revenue raised by a 20% non-compliance in 82 live animal markets.
Thank you. So let's congratulate all of our briefers and groups. Wonderful job. So a couple of points I want to conclude with. First, you may have noticed we didn't have any federal laws that we looked at. That was quite deliberate since we no longer have an Environmental Protection Agency in Washington. We have something else. But here in New York State and in states all over the country and in cities, we see, in fact, doubling down on environmental programming and policy. We've seen this movie before. I came to Columbia in 1981 because of President Reagan stopping everything I was working on when I was working at EPA. We've seen this during the first Trump administration, although frankly I've never seen anything quite as intense as what's going on. But I feel the tide is turning and that we are going to see the resumption of federal environmental law in the United States. We're certainly seeing it in other countries around the world. But I wanted to note that we quite deliberately, as a faculty, focused on New York State and New York City, in fact, to make this point that there's going to be plenty of activity in the public policy realm. There's certainly a lot going on in corporations. And the field, what I sometimes call the green economy, is still growing faster than the rest of the economy. And so I want to reassure anybody here and anybody online that sees this that we are in a booming field despite the headwinds that are in Washington. So the other thing I want to mention, and I keep talking about how unique this group is and how unique your curriculum is. Typically, environmental policy focuses on cost-benefit analysis, designing policies, economists, driving the analysis in terms of what would be the best policy design, which we do spend time doing here. But we take it further because you could have the most beautiful and elegant policy design. If you haven't thought through how it's going to actually happen on the ground, all you have is a beautiful policy design. And I'm not against beauty in policy, but to me, what actually happens on the ground and whether or not it's realistic and you've thought through how much is it going to cost, who's going to do the work, how will we know if it's succeeding? If you do this long enough, those are the things you really think about because you can have lots of great theory without any real activity. And so we do that. And in the case of this workshop, it's very practical, it's very focused, it's very disciplined. The questions you ask of each other are exactly the kind of questions that you would find if you were doing this outside of simulation in a real job. And so what I think is really important is to understand just how much you know. And I often say this at the final briefing. Think about the project you worked on and how much more you know about the policy issue, the science, and the management issues of these 5 areas. And also think about this. It doesn't really, we're not trying to teach you to be an expert in zoonotics or an expert in lead pipe pollution or in shade or any of these other areas. This is a process. It's a problem-solving process where you go from this problem and you see how legislators come up with a proposed solution. In many cases, these solutions aren't great. We notice that. You notice that. But then, does it move the dial a little bit? Does it move you forward? And so we think about that. And then we think about how to take what might be a bad design and take the best parts of it and focus on that so we can get some progress so the next time a bill passes, it deals with the deficiencies that we've identified in this. You've done all of that. So there was legal analysis, there was scientific analysis, management analysis, policy analysis, all of that brought together in a problem-solving exercise. So it's important for you to know what you know. You've now gone through an intellectual exercise and a 2-semester class, working intensely together and producing what I have to say were 5 magnificent, really high-quality briefings that I would put up against anything I ever see professionally. In fact, in some cases, this is better. So congratulations to you and congratulations to the class. Looking forward to seeing you do this for clients and really making a direct contribution to making the world a better place. So congratulations to all.